Ballad of the Baron by J.V. Multari. A thick layer of snow rested across the fortress of Kingshield, though a blazing fireplace warmed Baron Nicolas's chambers, and Captain Marlane warmed his bed. The two relaxed in an easy quiet as the fire crackled. Marlane rolled to her side and looked at Nicholas with a challenging smile. "So, General, what am I to tell my company was so important that you needed me for an emergency meeting?" Nicholas grinned. "I'm not a general anymore. They made me a noble, remember?" The idea still seemed absurd to him, but the King of Devrone himself had placed the coronet on his head. "I remember the scandal you made when you insisted me and my line breakers accompanied you to this frozen hellscape. The rumors about our strategy talks are getting awfully close to the truth, Baron." Nicholas laughed until he saw the worry in his companion's brown eyes. "I take it not everyone believes the official story, then?" "That we did our job so well in the fields of Rhaegon that you had to have us in the north?" "No, not everyone believes that story." "But the line breakers left half a dozen sorcerers dead. That action alone led to the rout that pushed the elves back out of our lands."
"Darling, that was your plan, your glory. We were just mercenaries doing our job."
"Darling, eh?" Marlane bit her lip.
"Of course, that's all you'd hear me say."
"You know, I can think of one way to stop the rumors," Nicholas said with a sly grin. Marlane, intrigued, raised an eyebrow. "How does Baroness Marlane sound to you?" Marlane sat upright, her eyes wide.
"Are you serious? What about the line breakers? They need a captain, and I'm a lowborn. You'd have another scandal to deal with."
"All those things can be dealt with, if your answer is yes, of course." Baron Nicolas spoke with obnoxious self-assuredness. Captain Marlane rubbed her shaved head and got out of the Baron's bed.
"I'll need some time to think on it. It'd be a different life, you know."
She began searching for her discarded clothing amidst the mess they'd made.
"No more sneaking about and making up stories. It might take the excitement out of it."
Nicholas got up and began searching for his own clothing. "I think I'd rather just be able to eat with you in the mess. Or the dining hall, I suppose, since we'd be nobility." Marlane scoffed at the idea and left without another word. Alone, the Baron dressed himself in silence before he peered out one of the large windows over the fortress below. He'd been stationed here before, though he'd stayed in the barracks during his previous stints. Now he was expected to figure out more than just watch shifts and scouting reports. He'd have to make sure the iron mines were profitable, make sure food supplies came in on time, and worst of all, hold some semblance of a noble's court. Nicholas allowed himself to sigh and relaxed his shoulders as he gazed down the mountain pass towards Elven lands. Two walled gatehouses buffered the way before the mining hamlet and the fortress proper. It would be a fool's errand to attack Kingshield. Even if the attackers were to take the fort, they'd be in no shape to push onwards to Devrone. Nicholas grimaced. There would be no glory to be won here. He'd embarrassed the Wolf Lord of Rhaegon when he'd thrown the elves off their gates, and now he was stuck with an early retirement far in the north. At least Marlane was with him, and would be as long as the mines were profitable. He knew she'd never turn down easy coin for her soldiers. After all, a mercenary's life was filled with enough toil. They might as well take the easy job when they can. With Devrone only 2 days away, a week of leave would give the line breakers plenty of time to relax away from the frozen fort. As for Nicholas, there'd be no quiet trips to Devrone to catch a play. He'd have to make a formal arrival and deal with the nobility, another perk of his new station. He left his bedroom for the adjacent study and took a seat at his ornate desk. He looked over the ledgers that had drove him to seek out Marlane in the first place and grumbled. He had much to learn if he was going to manage his barony efficiently, but for now his head was swimming. Hours passed, and Nicholas's vision was so blurred that the words of the ledgers could no longer be deciphered. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes with a deep sigh. To his relief, a firm knock emanated from the door to his chambers. Eager for anything other than more reading, he stood from his desk, hurried to the door, and opened it. Seneschal Wilson stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 armored soldiers. His wrinkled face was firm and severe.
"Sir, I'm afraid I have grave news. You are required in the war room."
Nicholas raised an eyebrow.
"And here I thought the night would be boring."
He turned away from his seneschal and grinned at the 2 soldiers.
"It'll be good to be a general again, instead of some stuffy noble."
The soldiers said nothing, but the younger of the two grinned at the Baron's comments. Wilson, however, frowned and gave a disapproving glare.
Sir, this is no laughing matter.
Not to worry, I'm never more serious than when in a war room. Lead the way. With a quiet huff, Wilson turned and led Nicholas through the halls of the fortress and down to the lower levels near the ground floor. Wilson opened a nondescript door and gestured inside. The two soldiers took up positions guarding the entrance as Nicholas entered. The well-lit room featured a large oval table with a detailed map of the mountain pass that King's Shield defended, and room to stand. Captain Marlene stood near the table as she peered over the map. Next to her was a young man whose name the Baron did not know, but he wore his rank proudly on his coat. He held himself with the obnoxious air of importance of a noble, which explained the rank of general at such a young age. The general smirked as he noticed Nicholas.
Ah, General, my apologies. Baron Nicolas Durand, it is a pleasure to finally meet you.
His words were full of venom as he held out his hand to shake. Nicholas returned the smile, unbothered by the insult.
Greetings, General. My apologies, but I'm afraid you know more of me than I of you. Might I know your name before I shake your hand?
The young man's nose wrinkled as his face twitched.
Of course. I am General Charles Allard. I'm in charge of the garrison of King's Shield.
The two men shook hands. Allard's were soft and uncalloused.
I'm sure you're aware of my family, if not myself.
I served under Count Allard before my promotion to general. A strict man, expected only the best.
Nicholas smiled at the scion as he spoke.
Can I assume you live up to his name?
Of course. I graduated from Devron's military academy with top marks. As such, I've already conceived of a plan of action for our current situation.
Excellent. Then before we continue, would someone be so kind as to inform me as to what the situation is then?
Nicholas asked as he turned to face Seneschal Wilson.
Of course, sir. Our scouts have reported a large army on the march towards the mountain pass. The force is large enough to pose a threat to King's Shield.
No need to worry the Baron, Wilson. The enemy only has one vector of approach thanks to the mountains, and with our gatehouses in the way, we'll be able to rain musket and cannon fire on them as they arrive. We'll tire out their sorcerers with mass fire, and once the shields falter, we'll unleash the grape shot to rout the main force.
Nicholas nodded. A fine plan, however, I have some concerns. Allard rolled his eyes. The mountains may work against us. In tight fighting like this, sorcerers have far less area to cover with their shields. We have to be prepared for the possibility they breach the outer defenses. Nicholas looked over the map on the table and pointed at positions behind the second gatehouse. I propose we set up a fallback line here. While you lead your troops on the wall, I'll hold back and prepare to stop the enemy advances through the gates.
Allard scoffed. I will not be leading any such troops. A general is best spent directing a battle. With all due respect, your heroics at Rhaegon were an overly risky gamble. Should you have taken a stray arrow, your entire army may have routed. He pointed to one of the towers behind the second gatehouse. You and I will observe the battle from a safe distance. We have a contingent of sorcerers that could relay orders as needed from there.
I worry you underestimate the enemy.
King's Shield will not fall, Baron. Mark my words. Allard said before he cast a glance towards Captain Marlene, who studied the map with a grimace. As for the line breakers, I have no place in my plan for them. Perhaps they best be held in reserve, or better yet, released from their contract so they might serve the kingdom elsewhere.
The line breakers are under the command of the barony, not you, General. Captain Marlene, you and your soldiers will hold just past the second gatehouse. Should the enemy breach, you will be entrusted to hold them back.
Captain Marlene nodded.
As you say.
Several uneasy days passed while King's Shield remained alert for the incoming army. A messenger had been dispatched to Devron to warn of the pending invasion, but no word of reinforcements had arrived. On the 5th day, the bell towers of the fortress rang out. The enemy had arrived. Soldiers scrambled to their positions on the walls. Within minutes, the roar of cannon fire echoed throughout the mountain pass. General Allard and Baron Nicolas took to the balcony of the tower as they had discussed, along with a small detachment of soldiers and a sorcerer. Allard wore his general's attire and coat and scoffed when the Baron arrived in armor with a sword at his hip.
Armor, Baron? A waste of time, I assure you. The enemy will not make it this far.
Allard chided Nicholas over the blasts of cannon fire. Forgive this old soldier, General, but I've seen too many foolproof plans fall apart. I'd rather be ready to rally the troops should the worst come to pass.
Allard rolled his eyes and turned away from the Baron to peer off at the battlefield. The elven shields held strong as cannonballs shattered against them. As the army came into range, musket fire joined the cannons. The shields still refused to crumble. Nicholas turned to the sorcerer.
I want a report from the front. What's going on out there?
The sorcerer nodded and closed his eyes. After a moment, he opened them again. His mouth fell agape, and he began to stammer. Sir, it seems that the enemy brought a larger detachment of sorcerers than expected. They're rotating shield duties between volleys. In addition, they've kept 2 more sorcerers in reserve. Considering the lack of siege weapons, I believe they're meant to, open our gates.
Order the men to keep firing. We'll tire them out eventually. That's not going to work. It's too small of an area. They'll be able to cover their troops long enough to get beyond our gun line. We need to prepare a fallback line before our troops are trapped.
Baron, let your general do their job. Sorcerer, relay the order.
The sorcerer glanced to the Baron, but nodded and did as he was told. Nicholas gritted his teeth, but Allard was right. It was no longer his job to plan and direct battles. He watched as smoke filled the air around the first gatehouse, though the elves gained ground with every passing moment. The screech of steel warping filled the air. Allard peered through a spyglass and gasped. Nicholas didn't need to see it to know what was happening in the distance. The great steel gates of King Shield were being peeled open by elven magic.
Order the retreat! Fall back to the second gatehouse!
Allard barked at the sorcerer. It's too late for that. Look, Nicholas said as he pointed to the now open gate. Elven troops poured in and stormed up the stairwells towards the now surrounded defenders.
We have to retreat. Fall back to Devrone. We can rally there,
Allard said as he made for the stairs. Nicholas grabbed him by the coat collar. We will do no such thing. We still have soldiers in a gatehouse. We can still throw them back. Allard's eyes went wide with fear.
I committed most of our forces to the first wall. We don't have anything left.
Nicholas dragged the young general to the edge of the balcony and pointed out to where the battle still raged.
Those men and women are dying on your orders, and you think to abandon them? They're buying us time to ready a plan with their lives. You will stay and fight, or I'll see to it you're tried for desertion.
Allard nodded grimly.
Now, we still have our arsenal, the line breakers, and the civilian workers of the mines.
A tense moment passed as Baron Nicolas looked over the battle. The enemy had yet to cross the gap between the 2 gatehouses. The cannons had fallen silent, but muskets still cried out in defiance.
Tell the miners to ready barrels of oil over the gatehouse, but have them stay hidden. The line breakers and I will hold the enemy back once the gate is breached. We'll feign retreat once they've committed their forces. Then we will pour the oil and light them ablaze. With any luck, we'll catch their sorcerers and cause a rout.
Are you mad? You might as well invite the Pale Lady herself. You'll get anyone under that gatehouse killed.
Son, it's a battlefield. She's already here.
Captain Marlene and her company stood in position alongside Baron Nicolas in an uneasy silence. The sounds of battle had faded in the distance. The defenders were surely dead, or worse, captured. The familiar screech of metal reverberated through the cold air as the gate warped open. Crimson-red eyes glared at the last of the defenders as they marched forward in a shield wall.
Watch those spears, lads,
Marlene called out.
Stick close and don't overextend.
Her voice carried out over the troops and over Nicholas, who couldn't help but grin. He'd miss this, the desperation, the adrenaline, and when the day was won, the songs that would be written of their heroism. Now all they need do was spring the trap. The elves marched forward. A few thrust their spears outwards. In retaliation, the line-breakers chopped at the spears with their war swords. As they closed in, Nicholas let out a battle cry and battered a spear away with his shield before he thrust his sword down in the face of the first elf to reach their line. The line-breakers knew the plan and followed it with discipline. As the elven forces marched forward, they stepped back and let them advance. Once they were inside the gate, Nicholas gave a nod to Marlene, who reached for her war horn and blew into it. Oil fell from the wall and splashed onto the elven army. Looks of confusion gave way to horror as the pungent stench of oil filled the air as it soaked into the heavy clothing of the elves. Many dropped their weapons and attempted to flee. Some even charged into the line breakers, desperate to escape. Then a torch fell from the walls and ignited the oil and the elves. Screams filled the air, their agony apparent as they rushed in all directions. The line breakers held them at bay, though the oil did not discriminate. Some of the elves ripped their soaked and burning coats from their bodies and hurled them at the defenders. The line broke as the oil spread and flames engulfed Baron Nicolas, among others. Marlene's voice called out over the chaos, but Nicholas couldn't make out the words over the pain in his arm and face. He couldn't see as he was dragged away into the floor. Rapidly, a coarse blanket was wrapped over his left side and roughly patted until the heat was gone. Pain still racked his body, and screams filled his mind. Slowly, the cries of pain reduced to groans, and finally cheers. Only then did Nicholas let his consciousness slip away. He awoke in the infirmary, unsure of how long it had been. Healers rushed around as they treated the burned and wounded. His face and neck were tight, but he felt no pain, though he could not see out of his left eye.
"You're awake."
A familiar voice echoed from his left. He turned to face her and smiled when he saw Marlene, unharmed.
"Your plan worked again. The army routed when they lost their sorcerers."
Wonderful. Were there any survivors at the first gatehouse?
"A few, but not many. Allard petitioned Devrone for more healers to aid with the wounded. They should be here soon."
Marlene's gaze soothed Nicholas, who tried to smile, but found his face too tight to do so.
A shame, but not unexpected. Now, I notice I can't see out of my eye. How bad is it?
He asked in a steady voice, unafraid of the answer. She grinned.
"Bad, but you'll live, and that's what matters. You're mine, after all, not the Pale Lady's. You are lucky I like scars, though."
Thank you for watching this episode of Chronicles of Elentia. Please remember to like and subscribe if you want to see more.